Welcome to Moon's Fairy Tales. Today we journey into the galaxy far, far away with shadows of the lost force. What if Luke Skywalker, sensing a deep disturbance in the Force, set out to rebuild the Jedi Order before it was too late? Follow his quest as he confronts the dark temptations that lure young Force sensitives to the dark side and faces a relentless shadow that seeks to corrupt all hope. This is a tale of destiny, power, and the thin line between light and darkness. So sit back, relax, and let the Force guide you through this thrilling adventure. Shadows of the Lost Force. Chapter 1. The Whispering Stars. The stars above Octu were eerily quiet, their cold light casting faint shadows across the ancient stones of the island. Luke Skywalker stood alone on a cliff, gazing into the endless expanse. His cloak billowed in the wind, the only sound in the stillness. Yet, something was wrong. The Force, once a comforting presence, felt disturbed. Luke could sense it, a subtle whisper, barely audible, but there. It was as if the very fabric of the galaxy trembled with something dark and unsettling. He closed his eyes, inhaling the salty air, trying to center himself. Octu had been a refuge for years now. After the fall of the Jedi, after the betrayals, he had come here seeking answers, peace, anything to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed the galaxy. But peace had eluded him. Now visions haunted him nightly, whispers of the past and the future. They echoed in his mind, each one carrying a weight he couldn't ignore. Luke, the voices seemed to call, his name spoken in anguish, in fear. He could see flashes, faces of young ones, their eyes wide with terror. They were scattered across the galaxy, vulnerable, calling to him. And something was drawing them closer to the darkness. He opened his eyes, heart pounding. The visions were becoming clearer, more urgent. There were Force sensitives out there, young and untrained, just like he once had been. But instead of the hope he had found in Obi-Wan and Yoda, they were being lured by the lure of power, by the pull of the dark side. He couldn't let them fall. He couldn't let them become what Anakin had become. His father's legacy still hung heavy over him. Despite everything, despite knowing the man Anakin Skywalker had once been, it was the shadow of Darth Vader that haunted Luke the most. The dark side was always there, lurking, waiting for the weak and the desperate, and he could feel it now, growing stronger. It was no longer just a distant threat. It was reaching out to claim those too vulnerable to resist. Luke took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decisions settle over him. He could no longer remain in exile. His mission was clear now. He had to find these Force-sensitive beings, protect them, guide them before the darkness claimed them. The Jedi were gone, yes, but perhaps they didn't need to be extinct forever. Perhaps they could be reborn. But the path ahead was dangerous, and Luke knew it. The dark side had been gathering strength in the shadows. Whoever was behind it had been patient, methodical, luring these young ones with promises of power. He had to be quicker, more decisive. He turned his gaze away from the stars and down to the Millennium Falcon, resting silently by the cliffs. The ship was a familiar sight, and so many memories were etched into its hull, memories of Han, Leia, Chewbacca, and others who had fought alongside him. Now it would carry him once again across the galaxy, this time not as a rebel fighting an empire, but as a lone Jedi trying to restore balance. As he descended the rocky path towards the Falcon, a strange sensation passed through him, an ominous pulse in the Force. It wasn't the first time he had felt it, but this time it was stronger. It came from far away, from the deserts of Tatooine, a place where his journey had once begun. The same place where he had stared at the twin suns as a young man, dreaming of adventure and escape. Now something called him back. But it wasn't nostalgia pulling him to Tatooine. It was something darker. A shadow had settled over his homeworld, and it was calling to him. He could sense a young presence there. A boy, perhaps a teenager, sensitive to the Force but confused, lost. And something was hunting him. Luke reached the Falcon and placed his hand on its weathered hull, feeling the warmth of the metal beneath his fingertips. "Tatooine," he murmured softly. "It begins there again." R2-D2, ever by his side, beeped inquisitively, as if sensing Luke's resolve. "We're leaving R2, Luke said, his voice low but determined. "There's a boy on Tatooine. We need to reach him before they do." R2 whirred, his dome spinning in agitation. It had been a long time since they'd left Octu, and even longer since Luke had willingly sought out the darkness. But the urgency in Luke's tone was unmistakable. With a final look at the island that had been his sanctuary and his prison, Luke boarded the Falcon. The ship hummed to life, its engines roaring as it lifted off the cliffs. The planet below grew smaller and smaller as they ascended into the starry void, and Luke couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would be unlike any other he had taken. "The Force is calling," he thought to himself, staring out into the vastness of space. But so is the dark side. Tatooine came into view faster than he had expected. The familiar dusty planet, with its endless dunes and scorching twin suns, stirred something deep within him. It had been years since he last set foot here, and the memories were overwhelming. His aunt and uncle, the Lars homestead, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the moment everything had changed. But this wasn't a time for reflection. There was work to be done. As the Falcon descended towards the surface, Luke felt the presence of the boy grow stronger. The Force was swirling around him, but so too was a shadow, thick and suffocating. It was almost as if the dark side was feeding off his confusion, his fear. The ship touched down softly on the outskirts of Mos Eisley. The city, as always, was a hive of scum and villainy, and Luke could feel the tension in the air. But there was something else too, a disturbance, faint but growing. It was close. As he stepped onto the sands of Tatooine once again, the wind howled around him, carrying with it the faint whispers of the Force. "Danger," they warned. "Hurry." Luke pulled his cloak tighter around him and began walking towards the city. Somewhere within Mos Eisley, the boy was waiting, though he didn't know it yet. And so was the darkness, biding its time, waiting for its chance to strike. The streets of Mos Eisley were as chaotic as ever, with traders, smugglers, and bounty hunters milling about. Luke kept his hood up, blending into the crowds as he reached out with the Force, searching for the boy's presence. He could feel the fear pulsing from him, strong and untrained, but undeniably there. And then there he was. The boy couldn't have been more than 15. His face was gaunt, eyes wide with uncertainty. But there was something in those eyes, something Luke recognized all too well. The same yearning for belonging, for understanding that he had once felt. But with it came a sense of dread. The boy wasn't alone. Luke could feel it. They were close. He approached the boy slowly, careful not to startle him. But before he could speak, the boy turned, eyes locking onto Luke's. "Who are you?" he asked, voice trembling with fear. "I'm here to help you," Luke said softly, lowering his hood. The boy's expression softened for a moment, but then he stiffened, glancing nervously around. "They're coming for me," the boy whispered, voice barely audible. "They promised me power, but now I don't know what to do." Luke's heart sank. The dark side had already reached him. "They can't help you," Luke said gently. "But I can." The boy hesitated, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. But before he could respond, a cold, malevolent presence washed over them, sending a shiver down Luke's spine. The hunt had begun. Chapter 2: Echoes from the Past. The twin suns of Tatooine were beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Mos Eisley. The air was thick with tension, and Luke Skywalker could feel it. The boy he had found, Naren, as he had learned his name to be, was standing beside him, nervous and uncertain. His eyes darted between the crowded market and the horizon, where the desert stretched endlessly, hiding both dangers and secrets. "They're coming for me, aren't they?" Naren's voice trembled, his fear palpable through the Force. Luke could sense the darkness creeping closer. Someone or something was hunting them, and Luke knew that time was running out. "Yes," Luke replied, his voice calm but firm. "But you don't have to face them alone." Naren's gaze shifted to Luke, a mix of hope and doubt flashing in his eyes. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Luke paused, looking at the boy. In him, he saw so much of what he himself had once been: young, afraid, drawn to something larger than himself but unsure of what that meant. And, disturbingly, Luke could sense something darker within Naren. The boy had been touched by the dark side, just as Luke's father had once been. The memory of Anakin, no, of Darth Vader, loomed large in Luke's mind. He had spent years trying to come to terms with the legacy of his father, the man who had fallen to the dark side and become one of the galaxy's most feared figures. Now, here he was, standing before a boy who could easily follow the same path if Luke wasn't careful. "I see myself in you," Luke finally said, his voice quiet. "And I know what it feels like to be drawn to something you can't understand." Naren looked away, his expression tightening. "They promised me power. They said I could be more than this." Luke felt a chill run through him. The promises of the dark side were always the same: power, control, freedom from fear. But those promises were empty. They led only to destruction, as Luke knew all too well. "They lied to you," Luke said firmly. "The dark side doesn't give, it takes. It takes everything you care about, everything you are, until there's nothing left." Naren looked up, his eyes searching Luke's face for truth. But before he could respond, a sudden shift in the Force made Luke freeze. The air around them seemed to tighten, growing colder, heavier. Someone was coming. "Get behind me," Luke said quickly, pulling Naren closer as he scanned the crowd. His senses were sharp, attuned to the slightest ripple in the Force, but the presence he felt was shrouded in shadow, elusive and dangerous. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a figure moving through the crowd, cloaked in black, their face hidden beneath a dark hood. The Force radiated off of them, but it was twisted, warped by the dark side. Whoever they were, they had come for Naren. Luke's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his lightsaber, but he didn't ignite it. Yet, he couldn't afford to draw attention. Not here. Not now. The figure approached slowly, their movements deliberate, calculating. Luke could feel their gaze locked on him, even though their face remained hidden. The crowd seemed to part around them, as if the very air was afraid of their presence. "Skywalker," the figure hissed, their voice low and venomous. "I knew you'd come." Luke narrowed his eyes, trying to place the voice. It was unfamiliar, but the malice in it was unmistakable. "Who are you?" Luke asked, his voice steady, though inside, his heart raced. He could sense the power radiating from the figure, dangerous, corrupting. The figure chuckled softly, the sound cold and hollow. "You've forgotten me, but I haven't forgotten you, Jedi." A sense of dread began to creep into Luke's mind. He knew that voice, not the person, but the feeling behind it. It was the same feeling he had sensed years ago in the presence of the Emperor and his father, the dark side. But this was something new, something different. Before Luke could react, the figure raised a hand, and a sudden blast of Force energy surged towards him. Luke barely had time to raise a shield with the Force, the impact sending him and Naren stumbling back. The crowd erupted into chaos, people scattering in all directions as they sensed the danger. "Go!" Luke shouted to Naren, pushing him towards a narrow alleyway. "Run!" Naren hesitated for only a moment before dashing into the shadows. Luke stood his ground, igniting his green lightsaber with a snap hiss, the blade casting an eerie glow against the dimming light of the suns. The figure in black moved with surprising speed, drawing a crimson lightsaber from beneath their cloak. The two blades clashed with a crackling fury, the Force rippling violently around them. "Who are you?" Luke demanded again, his voice strained as he parried a flurry of attacks. The figure fought with precision and aggression, each strike aimed to disarm or kill. "I am the future," the figure hissed, their face still hidden beneath the hood. "I am what your father should have been, and I am here to finish what he could not." Luke's heart clenched at the mention of his father. "My father is gone. He chose the light in the end. You're nothing but a shadow." The figure's laugh was sharp, cruel. "A shadow? Perhaps. But even shadows have power, Skywalker. And you'll see just how deep that power runs." Their blades met again, the Force crackling between them. Luke could feel the darkness radiating from his opponent, but there was something else beneath it, something familiar. He reached out with the Force, trying to sense who or what this figure truly was, but all he felt was a void, an emptiness that chilled him to the core. "Your father's blood runs through you, Skywalker," the figure sneered, pressing the attack. "And it runs through me." Luke's breath caught in his throat. "What are you?" The figure pushed him back with a blast of Force energy, sending Luke skidding across the dusty ground. "You'll find out soon enough." Before Luke could recover, the figure turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only the faint hum of their lightsaber as they disappeared into the city. Luke got to his feet, his heart racing. He deactivated his lightsaber, the silence of the night settling around him. But his mind was anything but quiet. That figure, whoever they were, knew him, knew his father, and they were connected to the dark side in ways that Luke hadn't anticipated. But there was no time to dwell on it. He had to find Naren. Luke moved quickly through the back alleys of Mos Eisley, using the Force to guide him to the boy. The shadows of the city seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting and turning in a labyrinth of stone and sand. But Luke's senses were sharp, his connection to the Force pulling him forward. Finally, he found Naren huddled behind a crumbling wall, his face pale with fear. "Are they gone?" the boy whispered, his voice shaking. "For now," Luke said softly, kneeling beside him. "But we don't have much time. We need to leave." Naren looked up at him, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "Why are they after me? What did I do?" Luke placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the trembling beneath his fingers. "It's not what you did, it's what you can do. You're strong in the Force, Naren, and that makes you a target." Naren's eyes widened. "The Force? But I don't understand it. I can feel it, but I don't know what it is." Luke nodded, his expression softening. "I was the same once, but I can help you understand it, if you'll let me." The boy hesitated, his fear warring with something deeper, hope. "Can you keep me safe?" "I'll do everything I can," Luke promised. "But you have to trust me." For a moment, the two sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Luke could sense the boy's turmoil, his confusion, and beneath it all, the whisper of the dark side, still lingering, still calling. But Luke knew that if he could reach Naren, if he could guide him, there was still hope. Hope for the boy and perhaps hope for the future of the Jedi. "We need to move," Luke said finally, helping Naren to his feet. "They won't stop coming." As they made their way through the darkened streets, Luke's thoughts drifted once again to his father. The echoes of Darth Vader still haunted him, just as they always had. But now those echoes seemed louder, closer. The figure in black, whoever they were, had made it clear that the past wasn't done with him yet. And as much as Luke wanted to believe he had left that darkness behind, he knew, deep down, that it was still waiting. Waiting for him to slip, waiting for him to fail. But he couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not with so much at stake. As they reached the outskirts of the city, Luke glanced back one last time. The stars above Tatooine twinkled faintly, indifferent to the turmoil below. And somewhere in the darkness, a shadow was watching. Chapter 3: The Dark Pursuer. The suns of Tatooine were high in the sky, scorching the desert sands as Luke Skywalker led Naren through the barren wasteland. The oppressive heat was relentless, but it wasn't the weather that worried Luke. It was the growing presence in the Force, a darkness stalking them, creeping closer with each passing hour. The figure who had attacked them in Mos Eisley hadn't disappeared. They were following, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Naren, walking a few steps behind Luke, was silent, the fear still radiating from him like a beacon in the Force. The boy's strength was undeniable, but his confusion, and the darkness that had already touched him, made him vulnerable. Luke could feel the tug of the dark side around the boy, subtle but persistent. It wanted him. "We need to keep moving," Luke said, glancing back at Naren. "We're not safe out here." Naren looked up, his face glistening with sweat. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice shaky. "Why can't we just hide?" Luke's expression softened. He understood the boy's fear, but hiding wasn't an option. "Not anymore. We need to reach higher ground, away from the city. The less crowded, the better. It will give us a chance to sense who's following us." "And then what?" Naren pressed, his frustration growing. "You said they wouldn't stop coming for me. How are we supposed to fight them?" Luke paused, looking out over the endless dunes. The Force was always in motion, always shifting, and right now it was filled with uncertainty. He wasn't sure how they would face what was coming, but he knew that giving in to fear was the first step towards the dark side. He couldn't let Naren take that step. "Trust me," Luke said quietly. "The Force will guide us." Naren frowned but nodded, though the doubt in his eyes remained. He was young, untrained, and the power he could feel inside him was terrifying. Luke remembered that feeling well, the first time he'd realized just how powerful the Force could be. It had been exhilarating and terrifying, but now it was fear that consumed Naren, and Luke could sense it pulling the boy closer to the darkness. If he didn't act quickly, if he didn't protect Naren and guide him, the boy would fall, just as Anakin had fallen. They walked for hours in silence, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the sand and the distant howl of the wind. But as the suns began to lower, casting long shadows across the desert, Luke felt it again. A cold, invasive presence, watching them, hunting them. "They're close," Luke muttered under his breath, his hand instinctively moving to his lightsaber. Naren stopped, panic flashing across his face. "You feel it too?" Luke nodded, his senses sharpening. The presence was getting stronger, more deliberate. They were no longer just being watched, they were being tracked. And whoever was following them was powerful. "We have to keep moving," Luke urged, quickening his pace. But even as he said it, he knew it was too late. The presence in the Force surged forward, no longer hiding. The desert air seemed to shift, growing colder, heavier. The dark side was near. A figure appeared on the horizon, emerging from the heat waves like a specter. Cloaked in black, they moved with purpose, their silhouette growing larger as they closed the distance between them. Luke could feel the malevolence radiating from them, the same dark presence that had attacked him in Mos Eisley. "It's them," Naren whispered, his voice trembling. Luke ignited his lightsaber, the green blade humming to life with a sharp crackle. "Stay behind me," he ordered. His eyes locked on the approaching figure. He could feel the dark side swirling around this person. But there was something more. They weren't just strong in the Force, they were trained, precise. This wasn't some wandering acolyte of the dark side. This was a hunter. The figure stopped several meters away, the wind pulling at their cloak. For a moment, they stood silently, studying Luke, their face still hidden beneath a hood. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, they drew their weapon, a crimson lightsaber, its blade casting an eerie red glow across the sand. "So, Skywalker," the figure said, their voice low and distorted. "You thought you could escape me?" Luke's grip tightened on his lightsaber. "I don't know who you are, but you're not going to take him." The figure chuckled, a cold, hollow sound. "It's not about taking him. It's about destiny. Yours, and mine." With that, the figure lunged, their red blade cutting through the air with deadly precision. Luke met the strike, their sabers colliding with a flash of light and a crackling hiss. The force of the impact reverberated through the sand, sending ripples of energy across the desert. Luke's mind raced. This person wasn't just strong. They were fast, relentless, their attacks fueled by the dark side. But there was a strange elegance to their movements, as if they had been trained by someone who understood the Jedi arts. "Who taught you?" Luke grunted as he parried a series of rapid strikes, his muscles straining with the effort. The figure didn't answer, their hood slipping back slightly to reveal a shadowed face. But their eyes glowed with the unmistakable intensity of someone consumed by the dark side. Luke pushed back, using the Force to throw his opponent off balance, but the figure recovered quickly. Their saber spinning in a vicious arc, Luke barely had time to deflect the blow, the heat of the red blade scorching the edge of his robe. "They were right about you," the figure spat, their voice dripping with disdain. "You're weak, Skywalker, just like your father." The mention of his father sent a surge of emotion through Luke. Anger, regret, pain. He fought to keep his focus, to center himself in the Force, but the words echoed in his mind. "Just like your father." The figure pressed their advantage, sensing Luke's hesitation. Darth Vader was strong, He knew what real power was. But you've always been afraid of it. Luke blocked the next strike, but the force of it sent him stumbling back. My father chose the light, Luke said through gritted teeth. He found redemption. Redemption? The figure sneered, their red blades slashing through the air. Vader's legacy was power. The weak like you cling to false hope. Luke felt the ground beneath him shift as his feet slid through the sand. He knew he couldn't let this opponent get inside his head, couldn't let them twist his emotions. But the darkness around them was suffocating, relentless. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, Luke saw Naryn standing frozen in place, watching the battle with wide eyes. The fear radiating from the boy was palpable, and Luke realized with horror that the dark side was feeding on it, on Naryn's confusion, his doubt. You can still choose, Luke shouted over the hum of the sabers, trying to reach Naryn through the chaos. The dark side isn't your path, but the figure's voice cut through his words like a blade. You think he'll listen to you, Skywalker? He feels the power just as your father did. He'll come to us willingly. With a snarl, the figure lunged at Luke again, their attacks growing more frenzied, more desperate. Luke parried and dodged, his mind racing for a solution. He needed to end this quickly, before Naryn's fear tipped him towards the darkness. Then, in a moment of clarity, Luke saw an opening. The figure had overextended in their last strike, leaving their side exposed. Without hesitation, Luke called on the Force, pushing forward with a surge of energy. His green blade slashed through the air, catching the figure off guard and knocking their saber from their hand. The red blade deactivated as it hit the sand, the figure stumbling backward, gasping in surprise. Luke held his saber at the ready, his chest heaving with exertion. It's over, but the figure only laughed, a low, bitter sound. Over? No, Skywalker. This is just the beginning. Before Luke could react, the figure raised a hand, and a massive wave of force energy exploded outward, sending Luke flying back. He crashed into the sand, his lightsaber slipping from his grip as he struggled to catch his breath. When he looked up, the figure was gone, vanished into the desert as if they had never been there. Luke staggered to his feet, his body aching from the impact. He called his lightsaber back to his hand and turned to find Naryn, who was still standing frozen, his face pale with shock. Naryn, Luke said softly, walking over to him. Are you all right? The boy blinked, as if snapping out of a trance, and nodded slowly. Who was that? Luke didn't have an answer. He had never faced an enemy like this before, not with such a personal connection to his father's legacy. But one thing was clear. They weren't safe. Not here, not anywhere, until they understood who or what was after them. We need to leave, Luke said, his voice heavy with urgency. They'll come back, and we won't be so lucky next time. Naryn looked up at Luke, fear and confusion still swirling in his eyes. But why me? Why are they after me? Because you're strong in the Force? Luke replied, his tone gentle but firm. And the dark side wants to claim that strength. But I won't let them. I'll protect you. The boy hesitated, his gaze dropping to the sand. And what if I can't be saved? Luke felt a pang in his chest. He had asked himself that question once, long ago. You can be, he said softly, but you have to believe that. You have to trust me. For a long moment, Naryn was silent, his eyes filled with uncertainty. But finally, he nodded, a faint glimmer of hope breaking through the fear. Luke placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, offering him a reassuring smile. "Let's go." Together, they turned and began their trek across the desert, the suns casting long shadows behind them as they walked. But even as they moved forward, Luke knew that the shadow of the dark side would continue to follow them, silent, relentless, and waiting for its chance to strike again. Chapter 4: Beneath the Shadows of Coruscant. Word count: 7,000. The distant hum of Coruscant's sprawling cityscape was a constant, a mechanical rhythm that pulsed through every level of the planet. From the glittering towers in the upper city to the dark, forgotten depths of the lower levels, the metropolis was a labyrinth of lights, shadows, and secrets. Luke Skywalker stood at the edge of a platform overlooking the endless expanse of the city, the wind tugging at his cloak. Beneath him, Coruscant's darker underworld stretched into a murky abyss, unseen but ever-present. Narran stood beside him, peering into the darkness with wide, uncertain eyes. The boy had grown quieter since they had left Tatooine, the weight of the encounter with the dark pursuer still heavy on his shoulders. Luke could sense the turmoil brewing within him, the confusion and fear mingling dangerously with the raw power of the Force. The boy's connection to the Force was undeniable, but so too was the shadow that clung to him. Coruscant was their next stop, a place where Luke had once thought the Jedi could thrive again. But now the city was a breeding ground for darkness. Luke had felt a disturbance here, something deep and insidious growing beneath the surface. It wasn't the remnants of the Empire, not exactly. This was older, more hidden. The dark side had always found ways to corrupt, and in the shadows of Coruscant, it had flourished. "They say the deeper you go, the worse it gets," Narran murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Luke nodded, his gaze still fixed on the skyline. "That's true. The lower levels are where the city's forgotten. The criminals, the desperate, and now, something more." Narran glanced at Luke, frowning. "More? Like what?" Luke's eyes darkened. "The dark side is growing here, Narran. I can feel it. There are others like you, young, Force-sensitive, and they're being pulled into something. I don't know what it is yet, but it's dangerous, and we need to stop it." Narran swallowed, his fear palpable in the Force. "Do you think they'll be like me? Confused?" Luke turned to face him, his expression softening. "Maybe, but confusion can lead to the dark side if left unchecked. That's why we're here, to help them, to stop the darkness from taking them." Narran hesitated, his eyes flickering with doubt. What if it's already too late? What if they've fallen? Luke sighed. It was a question that haunted him as well. He had seen how quickly the dark side could take hold, how it could consume even the strongest of wills. His father, Anakin, had been proof of that. "We'll do what we can," Luke said finally. "But remember, the Force is always about balance. Even in the darkest places, there's still light." He could see Narran was unconvinced, but there wasn't time for further discussion. The presence Luke had been feeling since they arrived on Coruscant was growing stronger, pulling him downward, into the heart of the city's underworld. "We need to move," Luke said, his voice firm. "The Force is guiding us, but the closer we get, the more dangerous it'll become." They descended into the depths of Coruscant, passing through narrow alleys and forgotten corridors, far from the gleaming towers above. The lower they went, the more oppressive the air became. The sounds of the upper city faded away, replaced by the hum of ancient machinery and the distant voices of the unseen. The deeper they ventured, the stronger the disturbance in the Force grew. Luke's senses were alert, his mind attuned to every shift in the energy around them. He knew they were getting close to the source, but what awaited them was still a mystery. Master Skywalker, Naren whispered suddenly, stopping in his tracks. I feel something. Luke turned, his eyes narrowing. What is it? Naren's face was pale, his eyes wide. It's calling to me. The darkness. It's like it knows me. Luke's heart tightened. He had feared this. The dark side was relentless, always searching for weakness, always seeking to exploit those who were vulnerable. He placed a hand on Naren's shoulder, grounding him. Don't listen to it. It's trying to manipulate you. Naren nodded, though the fear in his eyes remained. They continued on, the streets growing darker, more desolate. The few figures they passed were hooded and silent, watching them from the shadows. Luke kept his guard up, his senses sharp. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it became, not just because of the physical threats, but because of the unseen forces at work. At last, they reached the heart of the disturbance. A towering building loomed ahead, half in ruin, its structure decaying and covered in graffiti. The darkness that emanated from it was thick, suffocating, and Luke could feel the presence of multiple force sensitives inside. Young ones, like Naren, drawn to the power that lurked within. This is it, Luke murmured. They're inside. Naren swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. What are we going to do? Luke looked at him, his expression resolute. We're going to stop them. But first we have to get in, and we have to be careful. The dark side will try to turn us against ourselves. Stay close to me, and don't let fear take control. Naren nodded, though his fear was still palpable. Together, they approached the building, slipping inside through a side entrance. The interior was dark, lit only by the faint glow of flickering lights and the eerie hum of ancient machinery. The building had once been something important, but now it was forgotten, abandoned to the forces that had claimed it. The shadows seemed to move on their own, the dark side thick in the air. Luke could feel them now. 5 or 6, all young, their force signatures bright but tainted. They were close, and they weren't alone. There was another presence here, something older, darker, and far more dangerous. As they moved deeper into the building, Luke heard voices, faint at first, but growing louder as they approached. He motioned for Naren to stay back, his heart pounding in his chest. The voices were distorted, twisted by the dark side, and as Luke listened, he felt a chill run down his spine. They've promised us power, control, everything we've ever wanted, one voice said, full of conviction. They lied to us, another voice responded, more hesitant, but still tinged with fear. I can feel it. This isn't what we were told. Luke stepped forward, revealing himself to the group. 6 young men and women stood in a circle, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They were scared, confused, but their fear had turned to anger. Anger that was being manipulated by the unseen forces around them. You're being deceived, Luke said calmly, his voice cutting through the tension. The dark side doesn't give, it only takes. The young force sensitives turned to face him, their expressions hardening. Who are you? One of them demanded, a tall young man with a shaved head. What do you know about any of this? Luke held his hands out in a gesture of peace. I'm Luke Skywalker. I've seen what the dark side can do. I'm here to help you, to show you there's another way. The young man sneered. Skywalker? The Jedi? The ones who let the galaxy fall into chaos. You don't understand, another young woman said, stepping forward, her eyes burning with intensity. The Jedi failed. The dark side, it offers us a chance to fix everything. We can take control, become stronger than anyone who ever stood against us. Luke shook his head, his heart heavy. That's what they want you to believe. But power without balance is destructive. It will consume you, just like it consumed my father. Your father? The tall young man scoffed. Darth Vader was power. He had control, and he wasn't afraid to use it. Luke felt a pang of sorrow at the mention of his father's legacy. Darth Vader was a slave to the dark side, just like you're becoming. He lost everything because of it, his friends, his family, his humanity. The dark side doesn't give you freedom. It chains you. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of Luke's words hanging in the air. But the darkness around them was relentless, twisting their emotions, feeding their fears. The young ones were close to the edge, and Luke could feel the pull of the dark side growing stronger with every passing second. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked, and radiating pure malevolence. Luke's heart sank as he realized who it was. The same dark pursuer who had attacked them on Tatooine. You should have stayed hidden, Skywalker, the figure hissed, stepping into the dim light. These young ones are mine now. Luke ignited his lightsaber, the green blade casting an eerie glow in the darkened room. I won't let you take them. The dark pursuer smiled, their crimson lightsaber igniting with a sharp snap hiss. You're too late. Before Luke could react, the dark pursuer raised a hand, and the young Force sensitives around them began to convulse, their eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. The dark side had fully taken hold, twisting their minds, corrupting their souls. No! Luke shouted, reaching out with the Force, trying to break the dark pursuer's hold. But the darkness was too strong, too entrenched in the room. Narration stepped forward, his face pale with fear. What do we do? Luke's mind raced. He couldn't fight the dark pursuer and save the young ones at the same time. The dark side was too powerful here, and the longer they stayed, the more it would consume them. We need to leave, Luke said, his voice tight with urgency. Now. But before they could move, the dark pursuer lunged, their red blade cutting through the air. Luke barely had time to block the strike, the force of the blow sending him stumbling back. Chapter 5: The Abyss of Fear. The cold silence of the hidden enclave beneath Coruscant enveloped Luke Skywalker as he stood alone in the training chamber. The dim light flickered from the overhead panels, casting long, haunting shadows on the walls. He closed his eyes, reaching out through the Force, feeling the subtle vibrations in the air, an unsettling darkness lurking just beneath the surface. The events from the previous day weighed heavily on his mind. The confrontation with the dark pursuer had shaken him deeply. The Sith's power had been palpable, and the pull of the dark side had nearly overwhelmed the group of young Force sensitives they had encountered. Luke had managed to save them, for now, but the taint of the dark side still clung to them, whispering in their minds, gnawing at their fears. His own fears mirrored theirs. His father, Anakin Skywalker, had succumbed to those same whispers. The temptation, the promise of power, had been too strong for him to resist. Luke couldn't allow these young ones to suffer the same fate, but doubt crept into his heart. Could he save them? Could he guide them away from the darkness that was already pulling them under? Narration had sensed it too. Since their escape from the underworld, the boy had grown more withdrawn, his connection to the Force clouded by his inner turmoil. Luke had tried to reach him, but the dark side was persistent, twisting Narran's fears, his insecurities, into something more dangerous. The doors to the chamber slid open, and Naren stepped inside, his expression tense, his eyes filled with confusion. He had been struggling ever since they had returned to the Enclave, fighting the inner battle between the pull of the dark side and his desire to follow Luke's teachings. "Master Skywalker," Naren began, his voice shaking slightly, "I don't understand. I feel it all the time now, the darkness. It's everywhere. I can't push it away." Luke opened his eyes and turned to face the boy. His heart ached as he saw the fear in Naren's eyes, the same fear he had seen in countless others before they had fallen. "It's not something you can just push away," Luke said gently, stepping toward him. "The dark side preys on fear, on doubt. It's a part of the Force, and it will always be there. But you have a choice." Naren shook his head, his hands trembling. "I can feel it calling to me. It's like it knows me, like it understands what I want, what I need. The power, it's so strong." Luke's voice softened, but his words carried the weight of experience. "That power isn't real, Naren. The dark side offers only the illusion of control, promises strength, but it takes everything from you in the end. I've seen it happen. My father was consumed by it, and it nearly destroyed the galaxy." The boy's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "But what if I'm not strong enough? What if I can't resist it?" "You are stronger than you know," Luke said firmly. "But you have to believe that. The dark side will always try to pull you in, but you can fight it. You have to trust yourself, and you have to trust in the light." Naren looked down at his hands, his brow furrowed in thought. The conflict within him was clear, and Luke knew that the boy was at a critical juncture. One wrong step, and Naren could be lost to the dark side forever. Before Luke could say more, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the chamber. The other Force sensitives he had rescued entered, their faces pale and worn. Each of them carried the same burden as Naren, the same uncertainty and fear. They had all been touched by the darkness, and Luke could feel the weight of it pressing down on them. "We've all felt it, Master Skywalker," said a young woman named Kalia, her voice filled with tension. "Since we left that place, it's been harder to ignore. The darkness, it's everywhere. I'm afraid that if we can't stop it, we'll end up like them." Luke nodded, sensing their growing desperation. The dark side had left its mark, and its influence was creeping into their thoughts, clouding their judgment. He had to act before it was too late. "I know you're all afraid," Luke said, his voice calm but resolute. "The dark side thrives on fear, and it will try to use that fear to control you. But fear is a choice. The light is always there, waiting for you to embrace it. You have to trust in the Force and in yourselves." "But what if we're not strong enough?" asked another student, a boy named Gerald, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if we fall?" Luke hesitated. He couldn't offer them false hope. He knew the danger they were in. He had seen too many fall to the dark side, too many lost to its promises. But he also knew that they still had a chance to resist, to rise above their fear. "You have more strength than you realize," Luke said finally, his gaze sweeping over the group. "But the path ahead won't be easy. You'll have to face your fears, confront the darkness within you, and choose to stand against it. The Force is with you, but the choice is yours." The students exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of Luke's words sinking in. They were young, inexperienced, and they had seen the power of the dark side up close. But they had also felt the light of the Force, the potential for something greater. How do we fight it? Naren asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How do we stop it from taking us? Luke's eyes softened. You don't fight the dark side by hating it or by fearing it. You fight it by understanding it and then choosing the light. The darkness within you is a part of the Force, but it doesn't define you. You define yourself by the choices you make. Silence hung in the air for a moment, the weight of the conversation pressing down on them all. Luke could feel the internal struggle within each of them, the fear warring with hope, the doubt gnawing at their resolve. Then, as if responding to an invisible signal, the enclave seemed to tremble, the faint hum of the Force growing stronger. Luke's eyes narrowed as he sensed it, the presence that had been watching them, observing from the shadows. The dark side had been waiting for its moment to strike, and now it was here. A cold, malevolent energy swept through the chamber, sending a shiver down Luke's spine. His hand instinctively went to the hilt of his lightsaber, the Force warning him of an impending threat. Stay back, Luke ordered, stepping in front of the group as a dark figure materialized at the far end of the room. The dark pursuer had returned. Skywalker, the figure hissed, their voice dripping with malice. You can't protect them. The dark side is already within them. It's only a matter of time before they join us. Luke's heart pounded as he ignited his lightsaber, the green blade casting a faint glow in the dimly lit chamber. I won't let that happen. The dark pursuer sneered, their red lightsaber snapping to life in response. You're deluding yourself. The dark side is inevitable. You can feel it, can't you? They're afraid, and that fear will lead them straight into my hands. Luke steadied his breathing, centering himself in the Force. The fear in the room was thick, palpable, but he couldn't let it overwhelm him or his students. He had to stand firm, to show them that the light could overcome even the darkest shadows. Fear is a choice, Luke said quietly, his eyes locked on the dark pursuer. And so is hope. With a swift motion, the dark pursuer lunged, their red blades slicing through the air with deadly precision. Luke blocked the strike, their sabers clashing with a crackling hiss. The Force rippled through the room as the two combatants locked in a fierce battle, their movements fluid and precise. The students watched in stunned silence, their fear growing with each passing second. The darkness in the room was suffocating, the dark side pressing in on them from all sides. Luke could sense their fear, their uncertainty, but he couldn't let it distract him. He had to focus, had to show them that the light was stronger. You can't win, Skywalker, the dark pursuer growled, their attacks growing more aggressive. The dark side will always find a way. Luke gritted his teeth, deflecting a flurry of strikes. Not this time. With a powerful surge of the Force, Luke pushed the dark pursuer back, sending them stumbling across the chamber. The Sith regained their footing quickly, their eyes glowing with rage as they prepared for another assault. But Luke had already sensed it, the opening. Before the dark pursuer could strike again, Luke reached out with the Force, pulling the red lightsaber from their grasp. The weapon flew across the room, clattering to the ground as the dark pursuer staggered back in shock. Your power comes from fear, Luke said, his voice steady. But I'm not afraid. The dark pursuer's eyes narrowed, their face twisted in fury. You think you've won, Jedi? This is only the beginning. With that, the dark pursuer vanished, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had arrived. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight of the dark side lifting slightly, but the tension still lingered in the air. Luke deactivated his lightsaber, his heart still pounding. He turned to face his students, who were watching him with wide, fearful eyes. "You see," Luke said quietly, his voice filled with conviction. "The dark side can be defeated, but it takes strength and trust in the light." Naren stepped forward, his expression conflicted. "But it's still there. I can feel it. The fear, the darkness. It's still inside me." Luke placed a hand on Naren's shoulder, offering him a reassuring smile. "It will always be there. The dark side is part of the Force, just as the light is. But you don't have to let it control you. You choose who you become." For a long moment, Naren was silent, his mind wrestling with the truth of Luke's words. The other students stood quietly, their faces still marked by uncertainty, but with a glimmer of hope shining through. "We'll continue our training," Luke said, his voice calm but resolute. "And together, we'll learn how to stand against the dark side, how to resist its pull. But remember, the battle isn't just against the darkness out there. It's within you, and that's where the real fight begins." As the students nodded in understanding, Luke knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But he also knew that, as long as they held on to the light, there was still hope. Chapter 6. A Shadow's Choice. The air in the hidden enclave was thick with tension. Luke Skywalker stood in the dimly lit hall, his senses on high alert. The Force rippled around him, carrying with it a disturbance, a warning that something was about to shift, and not for the better. His gaze swept over the group of young Force sensitives he had been training, his mind weighed down by their inner struggles. But one presence in particular drew his focus, pulling at him like a silent cry for help. Naren. The boy had grown more distant over the last few days, his confusion festering, his connection to the dark side deepening. Luke had sensed the change and had tried to reach out to him, to guide him back, but the pull of the darkness was growing stronger. Now Luke could feel it, the decision had been made. Naren was gone. Luke's heart sank as he scanned the enclave, the realization settling over him like a cold shadow. The boy was no longer there, and neither was the hope Luke had clung to. He knew with a painful certainty that Naren had chosen the dark side. The others sensed it too. Kalia, the most promising of the students, looked at Luke with wide, fearful eyes. "Master Skywalker," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's gone, isn't he?" Luke nodded grimly. "Yes, the dark side has him now." A murmur of fear spread through the group, their faces filled with uncertainty. They had all sensed Naren's growing struggle, but none of them had expected this. The idea that one of their own could be lost to the darkness had shaken them to their core. "What do we do?" Gerald, another student, asked, his voice trembling. "Do we try to bring him back?" Luke's jaw tightened as he considered their options. He had been in this position before too many times. He had tried to save others, only to watch them fall deeper into the abyss. And now Naren had chosen that same path. But Luke couldn't just abandon him. Not yet. "We can't give up on him," Luke said, his voice firm but laced with sorrow. "There's still a chance, a small chance, that we can bring him back. But it won't be easy. The dark side has a powerful grip on him now." Kalia stepped forward, her expression resolute. "We'll help you, Master. We won't let him fall without a fight." Luke offered her a weak smile, though the weight of the situation bore heavily on his heart. "Thank you, Kalia, but this isn't just about Naren. The dark side is watching us, waiting for us to slip. We must be careful, or we may lose more than just him." As Luke turned to leave the chamber, his mind racing with thoughts of how to confront Naren, he felt a sharp disturbance in the Force, a ripple of malevolent energy surging through the Enclave. They were already here. Without hesitation, Luke rushed to the door, the familiar weight of his lightsaber at his side. The young students followed closely behind, their fear evident in the Force, but their resolve steady. Outside, the sky was dark, and the once peaceful atmosphere of the Enclave had been replaced by an oppressive presence. The dark pursuer had returned, and with them, Naren. Luke could see the two figures in the courtyard below. The dark pursuer's crimson lightsaber cast an eerie red glow across the stone floor, while Naren stood beside him, his eyes cold, distant. The boy's once vibrant connection to the Force was now tainted by the dark energy swirling around him. "Naren!" Luke called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "It's not too late. You don't have to do this." Naren didn't respond. His gaze locked on Luke with an unreadable expression. The dark pursuer, however, stepped forward, a cruel smile playing on their lips. "Ah, Skywalker," the dark pursuer sneered, their voice dripping with mockery. "Still clinging to your foolish hope? The boy has made his choice. He belongs to the dark side now, just as your father did." Luke's chest tightened at the mention of his father, but he didn't let the words shake him. "My father chose the light in the end," Luke said, his voice steady. "And so can Naren." The dark pursuer's smile twisted into something more sinister. "You think you can save him? He's already tasted the power of the dark side, Skywalker. He wants this." Luke's eyes flicked to Naren, searching for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of the boy he had tried so hard to protect. But Naren's face remained emotionless, his hands curled tightly around the hilt of a newly ignited red lightsaber. "I'm not afraid anymore," Naren said, his voice flat, almost hollow. "The dark side showed me the truth. You were holding me back, Master. I see that now." Luke's heart ached, but he refused to let despair take hold. "Naren, this isn't you. The dark side twists the truth. Feeds on your fear, your anger. I know it's hard, but you can still come back." Naren shook his head, his expression hardening. "No, I'm stronger now. You said the Force is a choice, and I've made mine." The moment hung heavy in the air, the weight of Naren's words crashing down on Luke. He had feared this moment for weeks, had sensed it in the boy's growing distance. And now, here it was, the final, painful truth. Naren had chosen the dark side. Luke's grip tightened on his lightsaber, though he didn't ignite it. "If you've truly made your choice," Luke said quietly, "then you know what that means." The dark pursuer laughed, the sound cold and cruel. "It means he's free, Skywalker, free from your weak teachings, free to embrace his destiny." Without another word, the dark pursuer lunged, their red blades slicing through the air with deadly precision. Luke ignited his green lightsaber just in time to block the attack, the two blades colliding with a sharp hiss. The courtyard erupted into chaos as the battle began. Luke's movements were swift, precise, his mind focused on the immediate threat. But even as he fought, his thoughts were with Naren. The boy stood back, watching, his expression unreadable. Luke could feel the conflict still churning within him, buried deep beneath the surface. "You're still afraid, aren't you?" the dark pursuer taunted, their attacks relentless. "Afraid that you'll fail, afraid that you'll lose him, just like you lost your father." Luke gritted his teeth, blocking another strike. "I won't let the dark side take him. The dark pursuer's smile widened, their eyes gleaming with malice. You already have. With a powerful surge of the Force, the dark pursuer pushed Luke back, sending him stumbling across the courtyard. Luke barely managed to keep his footing as the Sith advanced, their red blade glowing ominously in the dark. Before Luke could counter, a second red blade joined the fray. Naren's. Luke's heart sank as Naren stepped forward, his lightsaber raised, the red glow casting eerie shadows across his face. The boy moved with the precision of someone who had been trained in the ways of the dark side. Naren, don't do this, Luke pleaded, his voice strained with desperation. This isn't who you are. But Naren's expression remained cold, distant. I told you, I'm not afraid anymore. The dark side has shown me the truth. It's the only way. Luke's chest tightened, his mind racing for a way to reach the boy. He knew that if they continued down this path, it would end in tragedy. But the dark side had its claws deep in Naren now, twisting his thoughts, feeding on his fears. You don't have to fight me, Luke said, his voice calm but firm. This isn't the way to find strength. Naren's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Luke thought he saw a flicker of hesitation. But the moment passed as quickly as it had come, and Naren lunged, his red blade slashing through the air. Luke blocked the strike, the Force guiding his movements, but his heart was heavy. He didn't want to fight Naren, he couldn't. The boy was still in there, somewhere, buried beneath the layers of fear and anger. Naren, stop, Luke shouted, his voice filled with emotion. You can still choose the light. Naren hesitated, his lightsaber wavering for a split second. But then the dark pursuer's voice cut through the air like a knife. Don't listen to him. He's trying to weaken you. The dark side is your true path. Naren's jaw tightened, his grip on his lightsaber firming once more. He lunged at Luke again, the red blade cutting through the space between them with deadly intent. Luke deflected the attack, but his resolve wavered. He could feel the pain of the moment, the failure, settling over him like a heavy cloak. He had tried so hard to save Naren, to guide him away from the darkness. But now it seemed the dark side had won. The fight continued, the clash of red and green lightsabers echoing through the courtyard. The other students watched from a distance, their faces filled with fear and confusion. They didn't know what to do, how to help, and Luke couldn't ask them to intervene. Not in this. As Luke parried another strike from Naren, he knew he had to make a choice. A painful, impossible choice. If he continued to fight, he risked losing Naren forever. But if he stopped, the boy could fall deeper into the dark side's grasp, never to return. With a surge of strength, Luke disengaged from the fight, stepping back, his lightsaber still raised defensively. Naren, please, he said, his voice filled with desperation. This isn't the way. You're stronger than this. For a long, tense moment, Naren stood frozen, his red blade humming softly in the dark. His eyes flickered with something, uncertainty, as if the boy he had once been was struggling to break free. But the dark pursuer's voice cut through the silence once again. Finish him, Naren. Show him your true power. Luke's heart clenched as Naren raised his lightsaber, his expression cold once more. The choice had been made. With a pained sigh, Luke deactivated his lightsaber, lowering it to his side. I won't fight you, Naren. Naren hesitated, his red blade still glowing in the dark. What are you doing? Luke met his gaze, his eyes filled with sorrow. I'm giving you the choice. You can strike me down if that's what you want. But remember, that choice will define who you are. The courtyard fell silent, the tension thick in the air. Naren's lightsaber wavered in his hand, his expression torn between anger and fear. The dark side was pulling him, but Luke could sense the boy's struggle, the conflict that still raged within him. For a long, agonizing moment, the world seemed to stand still. Then, slowly, Naren lowered his lightsaber, the red glow fading as he deactivated it. Luke's breath caught in his throat, relief washing over him. Naren! But before he could say more, the dark pursuer stepped forward, their face twisted with fury. "You fool!" they snarled, raising their hand and sending a surge of dark energy toward Naren. Luke's instincts kicked in, and he rushed forward, using the Force to shield the boy from the attack. The dark energy collided with Luke's barrier, dissipating in a burst of light. The dark pursuer's eyes burned with hatred. "You'll regret this, Skywalker." Without another word, the dark pursuer vanished into the shadows, leaving Luke and Naren standing in the courtyard, the tension slowly dissipating. Naren looked up at Luke, his eyes filled with shame. I'm sorry, Master. I didn't." Luke placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, offering him a small, sad smile. "It's all right, Naren. You made the right choice in the end." But even as he spoke the words, Luke knew the battle was far from over. The dark side still lurked in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike again. Chapter 7: Into the Void. The barren landscape of the unknown planet stretched endlessly before Luke Skywalker as he stepped off the landing ramp of his ship. The air was thick with the weight of ancient memories, the ground beneath his feet scattered with the ruins of a time long forgotten. Towering stone structures, crumbling and worn by centuries, dotted the horizon, remnants of the old Sith Wars. The place felt cold, lifeless, yet the dark side pulsed through every crack in the stone, every whisper of the wind. This was where it would end. Behind Luke, his students followed, their faces etched with tension. They had come a long way, endured unimaginable trials, and now they stood on the precipice of something even more dangerous. Naren, who had once stood on the brink of falling to the dark side, walked alongside Luke, his expression unreadable. The choice he had made, the one that had saved him from the darkness, still weighed heavily on him. But Luke could sense the conflict within him had not entirely vanished. "This place," Kalia, one of the more seasoned students, spoke softly, her eyes wide as she took in the ruins. "It feels wrong." Luke nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant structure, the heart of the ruins, where the presence of the dark side was strongest. The Sith once ruled here. This is a place of their power, of their destruction, and it's where the dark pursuer has led us. Gerald, another student, shifted uncomfortably. "Are we ready for this? They'll be waiting for us." "We have no choice," Luke said, his voice calm but firm. "This ends here. Whatever they're planning, we stop it now." The group moved forward, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Luke could feel the Force shifting, an ominous presence looming ever closer. He had faced the dark pursuer before, but this time felt different. There was something more at play, something deeper, older, and far more dangerous than anything they had encountered before. As they neared the central ruin, Luke's senses heightened. The Force was alive here, thick with tension. The presence of the dark side was overwhelming, its energy seeping into the very stones around them. It was as if the planet itself was a monument to the Sith's long-dead power. They reached the entrance to the structure, a massive archway carved into the rock, its surface etched with ancient Sith runes. Luke could feel the darkness radiating from within, a cold, suffocating weight that pressed against his chest. He glanced at his students, sensing their fear. They had every reason to be afraid, but fear would only make the dark side stronger. "We go in together," Luke said, his voice steady. "Stay focused. Trust in the Force and in each other. No matter what happens, don't give in to fear." The group nodded, their expressions grim but determined. Together, they stepped into the darkness of the ruin. The air inside was thick and cold, the walls lined with faded murals depicting ancient Sith lords in battle, their faces twisted with rage and power. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the energy became. Luke could feel it pulling at him, testing his resolve, trying to worm its way into his thoughts. But he pushed back, centering himself in the light, reminding himself of the path he had chosen long ago. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, low and mocking. "You've come all this way, Skywalker, and for what? To watch your precious students fall? To witness your own failure, as your father did?" Luke's jaw tightened, his lightsaber already in hand. "You're wrong. They won't fall, and neither will I." From the shadows, the dark pursuer emerged, their crimson lightsaber casting an eerie glow across the chamber. But they weren't alone. Behind them stood several hooded figures, their eyes glowing faintly with the power of the dark side. Among them was Naren, another Naren, or at least the one that Luke feared he could become. "Do you see, Skywalker?" The dark pursuer sneered, gesturing to the figures behind them. "The dark side is their destiny. They are already lost, just as you will be." Luke's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the pull of the dark side growing stronger, its tendrils reaching out, trying to ensnare him and his students. But he stood firm, igniting his green lightsaber, its light cutting through the darkness. "They are not lost," Luke said, his voice strong. "The Force is with them. The light will always prevail." The dark pursuer laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the chamber. "You still cling to that naive belief, but this place, it will show them the truth. It will show you the truth." With a sudden surge of power, the dark pursuer lunged, their crimson blades slicing through the air toward Luke. He blocked the strike, the Force guiding his movements as their blades clashed in a flurry of sparks. Around them, the students faced the hooded figures, their own lightsabers igniting as the battle began. Luke could feel the weight of the fight pressing down on him, the dark side's presence threatening to overwhelm him. The dark pursuer's attacks were relentless, fueled by anger and hatred, but Luke remained calm, centered in the Force. He knew that if he let his emotions take control, if he gave in to fear or anger, the battle would be lost. "You're fighting a battle you can't win," the dark pursuer snarled, their blade crashing against Luke's. "The Sith have always been stronger. Your father knew that." Luke's expression hardened. "My father was redeemed. He chose the light in the end." "Redemption?" The dark pursuer spat, their voice dripping with disdain. "He was weak, just as you are." With a powerful surge of the Force, the dark pursuer pushed Luke back, sending him stumbling across the chamber. Luke regained his footing just in time to deflect another vicious strike, his mind racing for a way to end the fight. But as the battle raged on, Luke realized that the dark pursuer wasn't his only concern. His students were struggling against the hooded figures, their fear and uncertainty feeding the dark side. He could feel them slipping, their resolve weakening as the darkness crept closer. "Naren!" Luke called out, his voice cutting through the noise of battle. "Remember what you've learned. Trust in the light." Naren hesitated, his blue lightsaber clashing with the red blade of his opponent. His face was contorted with concentration, but Luke could sense the fear in him, the doubt. The dark side was pulling at him again, whispering in his ear, promising power and control. I don't know if I can," Naren gasped, his voice filled with anguish. "You can," Luke shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. "You have a choice, Naren. You always have a choice." The words seemed to reach him, if only for a moment. Naren's grip on his lightsaber tightened, and with a surge of determination, he pushed back against his opponent, finding strength in the Force. But the battle was far from over. Luke turned his attention back to the dark pursuer, who was already closing in for another attack. Their red blades slashed through the air, and Luke met it with his own. The two of them locked in a deadly dance of light and shadow. "You'll fail, Skywalker," the dark pursuer hissed, their voice filled with venom. "You can't save them all. The dark side will always find a way." Luke's face hardened with resolve. "I don't need to save them all. I just need to show them the way." With a sudden burst of speed, Luke moved forward, his green lightsaber slicing through the air with precision. The dark pursuer was caught off guard, their defenses faltering as Luke pressed the attack. With a final, powerful strike, Luke disarmed them, their crimson blade clattering to the ground. The dark pursuer stumbled back, their eyes wide with shock. "No, this can't be." Luke stood over them, his lightsaber still ignited, but he didn't strike. "It's over," he said, his voice steady. "The dark side has no power over me." For a moment, the chamber was silent, the tension hanging in the air like a heavy shroud. Then, slowly, the dark pursuers sank to their knees, their face twisted with disbelief. I was wrong." Luke deactivated his lightsaber, his gaze softening. "There's still time for you, too." The dark pursuer looked up at him, their expression filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. But before they could respond, the ground beneath them began to tremble, the ruins shaking as the ancient Sith structure started to collapse. "We have to go," Luke called to his students, his heart racing as the walls around them began to crumble. Together, they rushed toward the exit, the ground cracking and splitting beneath their feet. The ancient Sith temple was collapsing, its dark energy unraveling as the battle came to an end. As they reached the surface, the ground shook violently, the ruins collapsing into dust behind them. The sky above was dark, the stars barely visible through the thick clouds that hung over the planet. But the oppressive weight of the dark side had lifted, and the air felt lighter, freer. Luke stood at the edge of the ruins, his students gathered around him. They had survived, but the battle had left its mark on all of them. "Master Skywalker," Naren said quietly, stepping forward, his face pale but determined. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Luke placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, offering him a small smile. "You chose the light, Naren. That's all that matters." Naren nodded, though the weight of his experience still hung heavily on him. "I almost didn't, but you did," Luke said firmly, "and that's what makes all the difference." The students stood in silence for a moment, taking in the gravity of what had just happened. They had faced the dark side and come out the other side, but they all knew that the struggle wasn't over. It never would be. As they prepared to leave the planet, Luke glanced back at the ruins one last time. The ancient Sith temple was gone, buried beneath the earth, its power broken. But Luke knew that the dark side would never be truly defeated. It would always linger, waiting for the next opportunity. But as long as there were those willing to stand against it, there was hope. And in that moment, Luke felt a sense of peace. The battle had been won, and though the scars remained, the future of the Jedi and the light was still possible. Before we wrap up, don't forget, this is just the beginning of Luke Skywalker's epic journey. Will the Jedi be reborn, or will the darkness claim them all? You won't want to miss what's coming next. So make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and click on the card above to catch up on the previous episodes. More battles, more mysteries, and more choices await in our next story. So stay tuned.